If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey y'all, we are back. We decided we have a little bit more to talk about regarding the Atlas of the Heart and some other things that came to mind regarding our reading and our lived experiences.
Yeah. One of them is that as we read these books, I am just blown away at how the author will reference a book we've already reviewed. And it's so much fun to see these authors connecting with each other on the page. And I would love at some point to be in a room with all of them and see what they say to each other.
Yes, I would love to have more authors on our show, interviewing and talking with them. But it makes me feel like I'm a part of the circle when all these authors are referenced. And I'm like, oh, I know their work.
Yes. And I sort of agree with what they're saying here, that I'm glad they referenced them because I think they should.
Yeah, it's cool.
I anticipated. I told you that I think in one of these things I talked about being a crazy person if I died. And somebody found my books and all my notes in them because I interact with my books so familiarly. They would see that I lost my train of thought. Ding. What was I saying?
They would see your crazy thoughts and your relationship.
Yeah, but it had
authors.
something to do with what you were saying. The references. So I anticipate, they should be talking about Sean Acor, or they should be talking about John Rady. And then 3 pages later, they talk about him and I go, yes, that's good. I was just hoping you would do it sooner, but you got it in there. So that gives me satisfaction when I'm reading. It makes me feel good.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to bring up is that I know you mentioned the emotions wasn't like your favorite thing to read about, but I came across Andrew Huberman, a PhD, a neuroscience professor at Stanford, on Instagram. And I think we both must have ran into this where it was the mind-body connection, but it was a picture of the different areas that light up in our body based on the emotions. So
it was a heat map. I think they were doing thermogenic photography.
Yeah, he says the notion that the mind and body are separate is simply false.
Absolutely.
The nervous system bridges them both, and they communicate in both directions to direct our states. States include emotions, but are a larger umbrella for emotional responses that include bodily responses too. States are also more objective to define. So I saw that and I'm like, oh, that needs to be like a sequel to our emotions, is how it how our body reacts to these thoughts and emotions.
Yes, and the physical scientists love that because they can talk chemistry in that case, all the stuff that happens there. But the imaging was really interesting. I saw that as well, and the brightness that would show up when you were happy, and the extent of the brightness over your limbs or your trunk or just your chest area. It was very interesting. But I also think we're learning more about vibrations and we're learning more about magnetic fields. And of course, the more Eastern practices of medicine have often talked about energy, meridians, and fields. It's just that we haven't had the instrumentation in Western science to detect and measure and observe those things that have been shown to be true for like thousands of years. It's kind of fun when we can get scientific evidence to support the concepts that people come up with. But it's like gravity. We couldn't see gravity, and Newton figured that, there's something there. And then the fact that the world was round instead of flat, once you get the instrumentation to determine that, you can say, yep, they were right. So that's going to be some good reading. I think we were talking about maybe reading a book on earthing at one point, and there are probably some other ones in the vibrational wellness areas that would relate to this emotional atlas that we've just completed.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you listeners out there know of one that we should read or think we should.
Because we have some in mind, but we're
yeah, let us know.
open to suggestions.
And if you follow us at Health Geeks Podcast, I will post in our stories this picture that I brought up with the heat maps of how our bodies physically respond to anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness. It's really cool to see. So follow us, and I'll be sure to put that in our stories. But, you were talking about discoveries, and that made me think of yet another emotion that's in the Atlas of the Heart, and that was curiosity. Let me see if I can.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And that's one of the things that drives us in this, is that we are so curious. We want to see what's out there and in all these books and share it with you. But she had some, I'm sure I have some highlighted, so let me go to where curiosity is. It's like a true book club here. We're going to open to page.
Oh, while she's doing that, Brené has an illustrator friend who she asked to do some cartoons in this book, and she was really excited about his participation. And the cartoons are pretty interesting.
Yeah, they are fun. Why can't I? Okay, it's page 56 through 58.
Okay. There's a cartoon, see?
There's a cartoon, yeah. She talks about awe and wonder and curiosity and interest. This is an increasing number of researchers believe that curiosity and knowledge building grow together. The more we know, the more we want to know. I feel that way as I'm reading.
Yeah, but I felt that way for, I've run into this a couple of times in my life where, it's reductionist thinking in my mind where, that's kind of a Newton thing, that if you can understand the smallest thing, you'll understand the biggest thing. And you can do that either to infinity in either direction you want to go, whether to the microscopic or to the telescopic. And you get there and you just got more questions. So at some point, I let go of the curiosity, and there's an acceptance level.
Not being able to know
that
all
everything
the things.
is okay. And I don't know that I need to know everything, but I do struggle with it because I like to learn.
Yeah.
I'm a lifelong learner.
I think that's important that you brought that up, because I think it's good to be curious and open. But you're right. At some point, we have to realize we are not going to have all of the answers in our lifetime, and that's okay. It's okay to not know. She says curiosity is recognizing a gap in our knowledge about something that interests us and becoming emotionally and cognitively invested in closing that gap. Isn't it funny, though, that a lot of people don't recognize that gap? I think that is an issue, that we just kind of assume we know what we know, and we don't realize what we don't know.
Well, she had, I mentioned that she, to me, was doing a lot of Eastern yin-yang thing with these emotions. And one of the things that she was describing was mystery and understanding as opposites. The paradoxes would be maybe another way to say that, but that there is mystery and there's understanding, and they are related to each other.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Well, I just glanced down, and this quote kind of sums up a little bit of what you were saying a few seconds ago. Choosing to be curious is choosing to be vulnerable, because it requires us to surrender to uncertainty. Isn't that the truth? We have to ask questions, admit to not knowing, risk being told that we shouldn't be asking, and sometimes make discoveries that lead to discomfort.
Oh, that is so true.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Definitely. I also opened up to the Maslow's theory, and you said you read something about
I'm going to have to track this down. There was a group of Native American wellness healers, and I do not know the name of their group, but I saw a news release from them challenging Maslow's hierarchy. And that's something that most of us who have been through some formal education in caring for people have run across. Educators run across that, and medical folks do.
Right, yeah.
I guess you've confronted that hierarchy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I kind of accepted it. I didn't challenge it.
I know that's
but they are.
That'd
So we have
to
not.
share that.
Yeah, and we haven't really read anything from the Native American wellness perspective, which would be probably a good one to add in the list of to reads.
Mm-hmm. You know, this Maslow's hierarchy of needs is in her section about belonging and fitting in. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's such an important distinction. Did you remember reading that at all? Belonging and fitting in?
Well, yeah, and if you're hungry and, thirsty and you don't have a place to live, you're not going to fit in as well, right? With certain people who have those physiological things satisfied.
Yeah, because love and belonging is kind of in the middle of the hierarchy. But she says that we have to belong to ourselves as much as we need to belong to others. Any belonging that asks us to betray ourselves is not true belonging. And true belonging is a spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Mm-hmm. That's true Brené Brown speak right there.
Yeah, and that's, scripturally based as well. Love thyself.
Yeah, it's very spiritual to know
and she said
yourself.
Sacred, yeah. Mm-hmm. So there are probably lots of faith traditions or belief systems that reflect that understanding of the way the world works.
And you know how you said on, I think, the last podcast, how anger is usually, there's something underneath it?
She suggests that, and she said 91% of the researchers don't agree with her, but she does.
Yeah.
And I kind of think she's onto something.
Well, I think that a lot of our negative emotions can be led back to not having this level of self-acceptance, and there's something bubbling under the surface about not really knowing ourselves or understanding ourselves or loving ourselves. And she says our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance.
Her research, she's exploring the human experience, and a lot of what we understand about things is taken from animal research. We've done things with monkeys and dogs and, even worms and things. We've said, how do they behave when you take this away or give them that? And so I think maybe some of these people who disagree with her are probably looking at the animal models of anger. When a lion goes nuts, whatever, I don't know.
Interesting.
That just occurred to me as we were talking, because the isolation thing that you were talking about earlier made me jump to the experiments with the monkeys where, God, they took the babies away from the moms and set them in cages where they had no contact with their mother, and then they looked at what happened to them, and it was awful. I just can't conceive of doing this research, but it has informed us for many years about isolation and the need for bonding and touch and for healthy development to ensue. It's critical. And so that's a lot of what she's talking about too. And so when people have experienced these broken developmental years, it really plays out in the adult emotional status. And so if you're confronting people as adults with emotional problems, wow, that's work that I don't think I'm geared for, and she is. And thank heavens there are people that like to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I say counselors and anybody in the helping professions, this is an interesting topic.
Right. Absolutely.
So what you got there, that cartoon?
Oh, yeah, I'm looking at page 163, 162 and 163, the difference between fitting in and belonging. And these are actually from teenagers. Think about your teenage years, how you wanted to fit in, but really what you need is to belong somewhere. And they define it as belonging as being somewhere where you want to be and they want you. Fitting in is being somewhere where you want to be, but they don't care one way or the other.
Yeah, and then there's these advice givers who say, be true to thyself. Do not pay attention to what the other people want or do want.
Well, she says, fitting in is not what we want to strive for. Mm-hmm. And then there's some really
those were sad, very sad. Yeah,
what people thought about this The difference is, and they say not belonging at school is really hard, but it's nothing compared to what it feels like when you don't belong at home.
Mm-hmm.
That's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Not living up to your parents' expectations,
Mm-hmm.
not being as cool or popular as your parents want you to be, not being good at the same things your parents were good at. Gosh, there's so much pressure to be a teenager. Breaks my heart.
Read a couple more of those.
Your parents being embarrassed because you don't have enough friends or you're not an athlete or a cheerleader. Your parents not liking who you are and what you like to do. When your parents don't pay attention to your life. And lastly, belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, since brains are not developed, this is not true for every case, but I think the perception is a big deal here. What you perceive is going on in the world around you, you know, is what you believe.
Right.
And so some of the pressures that we put on ourselves are based on an inaccurate perception. And once that's discovered, it can be healed in some level. But if you don't engage in conversation and, you know, open up and explain how you're feeling, you can't get to that conversation.
Exactly.
About that is what I intended. Oh no, that's what you heard. You know, because you had a story in your head, you heard something and you fit it into your perceptive story.
So true.
Yeah, and so, you know, what's real and not real, who knows? Who knows what reality is? I think we're all in the Matrix.
Yeah.
Is there a pill I'm supposed to take?
Yeah, I think it's the blue one.
Okay.
Or red. I think the red's the one puts you in. Blue was you wake up in your own house and never change anything.
But we all have to be aware and curious, and it's I think helpful for everyone to talk out their emotions and try to name their experiences. Talk to a therapist. Let's normalize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I am Kristen Norton of Well Balanced Nutrition. Well Balanced Nutrition is one of the sponsors of the podcast. We have dietitians who offer highly personal coaching sessions to help you with behavior changes, mindful eating, intuitive eating, having realistic meal planning practices, and finding food that you love and loves you back. Give us a visit at wellbalancednutrition.com.
Yeah, and if you need some uplifting, I'm telling you, go outside, take a walk, let the sun shine on your face, and breathe in some good deep breaths. There's a lot of physical things we can do to affect our emotional health. And so I'm Eleanor at 360healthforyou.com, and we're creating a positive community of wellness. Reach out. We'd love to talk, and have a great day.
Views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.